we are going to be starting our webinar here today. That is the Ekahau webinar of September the 3rd. And this is and it's titled Understanding Wireless Networks, Validation and Data Gathering. And I am your sidekick, Stu. I'm going to be joined by my host, Tawny, and we've got some amazing guests actually on today. I'm super actually happy because these are actually somewhat, we've got a kind of a reoccurring rule that sometimes happens with Mr. Reed every once in a while. He kind of pops in and out of webinars, but Matt, this is actually, I think, your first official webinar. But before I even talk to the guests, I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Tawny, and get us kind of started. So let's go. And that was quite a mouthful. Thank you very much, Terry.
And cute. No, I can't, by the way, I cannot believe that it is already September. This year is just, it's just really going really quickly. But welcome everyone. As Stu said, we're really excited to have Chris and Matt on today. We'll start with Chris and let Chris introduce himself. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think I've been officially a guest on twice, but I think I've made a few more appearances than that randomly, at least for some banter or pinch hitting. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm Chris Reed. I'm a principal consultant at Verizon in their intelligent networking group. So I've got quite a few years. I think we're at 10 years or so in the wireless industry, working on large public venues, K through 12, higher ed, and as well as enterprise.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back and being reoccurring on there for us. And Matt, welcome to you, and thank you for staying late in your workday to join us. We appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller, so it's a pleasure to be here with you guys and to be representing the UK. So yeah, my name is Matthew Starling. I am a Wi-Fi engineer for a company in the UK called Natilic. But some of you who are on here today may recognize me from the podcast that I co-host called the Wi-Fi Ninjas. So yeah, that's me. Looking forward to diving into some Ekahau survey and validation data gathering.
So thank you. Good intro. We're really excited. So this is a topic we get a lot of questions on. So understanding validation and how important surveys are. So Matt, let's start with you. What are the biggest things to consider when you're getting ready to start a survey? You have a project that's coming your way, kind of what do you think are some of those key things that you need to consider to start?
Yeah, sure. So for me, the biggest thing is organization and preparation. So I have default templates that I use for even like folders. So whenever I have a new customer that I'll be dealing with, I'll have a structured folder so I know where I'm putting all the admin details of the documentation from the first engagement from the customer to where I store the floor plans to where I will then collect all of the Ekahau survey files in the same folder. And what I like to have as well is like folders for the report. So you can never be too organized, and I like to have a questionnaire that we will send to a customer before we do any kind of Wi-Fi survey, so to make sure we can gather all of their requirements. And I don't know if some of you are a little bit like me, but I tend to forget things sometimes, so I like to make checklists so I don't forget to take things on site, the things I need to do on site, or even some of the questions I need to ask before I go on site. So for me, preparation and organization is one of the biggest things I'd like to think of before I go on site to do any of my data collection.
Chris, what about you? What is one of the first things you do?
Yeah, I'm with Matt. Is that organization is key. So even before you go on site is making sure that you have all of your gear organized, that you have it all powered up and charged and ready to go. I'm not one for checklists on that kind of gear, but I do have a specific kit over my shoulder that has all of my gear in it. So everything has its spot. I can look at it and see if I brought everything with me very easily. Same thing with my PPE gear, the steel-toed boots, the hard hat, the glasses. I've got a specific bag that has all of that in there. So if I'm doing something locally, I can just grab both of those and throw them in the car and be ready to go. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, go ahead. It's interesting, Matt's, talking about checklists and how we do things. There is more than one approach to do a lot of the things that we do here. But specifically, let's go into talking about how the gathering of the requirements and understanding what you need to do while you're on site. So now you've got your gear, you've got everything else. Matt, let's talk about how you're testing client devices for those offset profiles and some of the things that you're doing in regards for that type of setup.
Yeah, sure. So this can vary depending on the type of environment that you're doing your installation for, your validation survey for, whatever you're doing your survey for. So say if it's a warehouse, for example, they might have scanner devices that they'll be using inside of the warehouse, or they may have these forklift trucks that they've got these tablet devices on that need to whiz around the warehouse as well. So understanding what their capabilities are, and like you just mentioned, Tony, about gathering the offset profiles for these devices. So what I like to do is once we've gathered that information and we know the device that we're going to be using on site, I ask if I can get some of those devices to do some testing with. And then what I would do is I would put the Sidekick in a similar position to these devices from the same distance from a test access point. And then I will use whatever I can to measure that data from the devices, from what they can receive the signal strength from that test access point. So say if we see the signal on the Sidekick from the test access point at -50, but the handheld scanner is seeing it at -55 over an average, I usually take about 10 to 15 recordings and then use a Excel spreadsheet to work out an average. I know my offset profile for 5 gigahertz on the handheld scanner device is going to be -5 dBm, so I can build that into my Ekahau profile.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, and while you're doing that is understanding what that least capable, most important client is. That's the one that you're targeting the offset for. But you also need to understand what its capabilities are. Is separate from the survey. Does it support R? Does it support K? Does it support V? Does it support all of the channels that either you're implementing into this or someone else has already implemented? So does it actually support 144? Does it support DFS channels? So doing a quick packet capture and getting that request frame, that probe request frame, and looking into it to see what the capabilities are. That's important because if it doesn't support those channels, you could do a validation survey. You could look at this whole floor plan and say, yes, it meets all the requirements. But if it doesn't support one of those channels, that device is going to see a gap in coverage when it's walking through any cell that is that channel.
Yeah, and Chris, that is super important to do the packet capture of the device. I don't know if like me, when you've been a customer, sometimes they'll give you the spec of a device, then you try search a data sheet and you're looking around to see if it's got, like you said, those amendments on there, like 802.11r, K, and V, because customer wants to use .1x radius authentication for the scanner SID, but you can't find anywhere if this scanner is going to support it or not. So you need, before you even get into that, the design of what you're going to be doing for that SSID, trying to find a data sheet that has them amendments in there, sometimes you're pulling your hair out. So you really need to do that packet capture to get that frames where you can see what the client is capable of.
Yeah, and even if you have that data sheet, that's a single point in time in a single version. So that device may have been updated. It may be a legacy version. So you want to do that capture. You want to look at what that actual device is capable of.
Yeah, Stu, what are your thoughts?
I think that get me on the spot, don't you? You love doing that.
Stu.
Yes. I was reading some questions. Sorry. Yes, the thing to consider.
We'll get to those.
I think actually, for sec, yes, for sure. Things for value. I think it definitely you've hit all the right things in here. And definitely is understanding, different types of client devices that you're testing for sure. And what are those aesthetics going to look like for AP placements, right? Those are definitely things to consider. I do want to point out that Chris, what's usually often overlooked actually is your consideration there. I think is that PPE gear. A lot of people actually forget about that, and they think that that's going to be provided by the site. Now, in some cases, yes, certain garments have to be provided by site. like in mining and whatnot, but at least have your boots, because those are the personal, and some gloves and whatnot. So have
And
things that are in there.
do not skimp on those. So the site may provide
No.
those, but those slip-on steel-toed covers, you are going to be aching after 2 hours of wearing those. So if you
After
need
5 minutes.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you need steel-toed boots, get steel-toed boots. Get your own steel-toed boots and don't skimp on them. You're going to be walking on them for hours and hours and hours. Make sure you're going to be comfortable. Same thing with sort of normal shoes. If you're walking around in an education space, that you want that to be comfortable. Don't skimp. Get orthotics if you need them. Get insoles if you need them. That it makes the survey process so much nicer when you're not hurting during it.
You know, it's funny. Gosh, 6 months ago or so, I guess we did a webinar with Jen Huber, and that's exactly what she's saying. One of the, doing the yoga to help for the miles and miles of warehouse surveys and everything that we're doing. So one quick question: with all of the different types of surveys out in that are available, how do you know? Chris, I'll pose this question to you. How do you know what the right type of survey for your environment is? Between continuous, utilizing the autopilot mode, how do you know what the best type of survey is for your environment?
Yeah, so it's going to come down to what you're trying to do, and the environment that you're in. So what you're trying to do comes down to, all right, am I doing a sampled troubleshoot in a small area? Am I doing a troubleshoot across a large space, or am I doing a validation survey, either validating something that I've installed, or validating something that that someone else has installed? So as far as the survey type, doing stop and go versus continuous versus autopilot, I always prefer, when I can, to use some level of a continuous survey. So I sort of classify autopilot and continuous together because they're constantly collecting data. Since it's constantly collecting data, you're getting more data samples across the same path. So you're getting more data, and as a result, you're getting better data. So anytime you can, using those, I've really been, autopilot's relatively new. I've really been liking autopilot, particularly in areas where I don't have great maps, in areas that I can't walk straight lines at a continuous pace. So sort of manufacturing and warehouse, where you're trying to keep your head on a swivel to make sure that you're not running into a forklift that's going by. Autopilot has been excellent for those kind of spaces. But because it's using the camera, certain manufacturing facilities where there's boxes or material whizzing by on conveyor belts, that may cause some problems with autopilot. It's just a function of ARKit, the Apple tie-in that's using that camera. So you may not be able to do autopilot in spaces like that, and then you may need to do continuous. Stop and go has its purpose. And has its place, and really is only in areas where maybe you have to climb over or under some equipment. There's a small area that you're trying to cover and do a stop and go. But remember, that's only going to be sort of one round of samples in a single spot. You're not going to get an understanding of what's around you. You'll only get an understanding of that single spot. And then Ekahau is going to do that free space path loss calculation for 7 feet or 10 feet or 15 feet or however you set that up.
Fantastic. So we're getting a lot of really, really good questions. Some of them are going to be related to some of the content that's coming up. So let's talk about what you do need to do. A lot of folks are asking, is it predictive enough? What kind of, what is the answer? Do I need to do an AP on a stick survey? And I think in this regard, this is when we look at the cost. Does the cost of the install outweigh the cost of the AP, right? When do the two cross over? If it's a scenario where you're doing like a Starbucks store and everyone is the same, do I need to do an AP on a stick survey in every Starbucks across the country? The answer is no, right? In reality. And so I think that's one of the biggest things, and understanding everyone has a different process, but let's look at some of the very, very particular things. I know, Matt, you had some thoughts on this. What are your thoughts looking at understanding like existing legacy networks that are there?
Yeah, I mean, trying to get an understanding of how the actual RF is going to be for the environment you're installing. It can be key because there may be like channels that are in use. So say if you need to deploy like a 2.4 gigahertz network, and there are neighboring networks that are using not channels 1, 6, and 11, or they're even worse, they're bonding channels together in 2.4. You're going to want to try and avoid that as much as possible. So get an understanding of what your neighbors are doing, or if there's any interference. So you could be susceptible. There could be like wireless video cameras there. Understand the environment. If it's going to be hit a lot by DFS channels as well, that could be playing a huge part into your design for when you do the design for how many access points you're going to install, what channels you can use, what channel widths that you can use. So I feel like getting an understanding of the environment always is, for me personally, worth it. And then even from when you try and do your predictive model, say if it is just a Starbucks coffee shop, I still find there's value in there going to the site and making sure that you know where you can mount the access points. Are there going to be any interferers? Like for me, I enjoy going to sites as much as I can. So then when I feel the more effort you put in before and as much you can do beforehand, the better outcome you're going to have later.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little more about the specific things that you need to do. Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. So before I start doing my validation survey on site, one of the things I'll ask the customer is if they can freeze the radio resource manager. I think Aruba call it ARM. And what that's going to do is it's going to basically stop the controller from changing the access points channels and the transmit power levels, because with Cisco, by default, the RRM algorithms runs every 10 minutes. And you may be thinking, oh, why is that a problem for if you're doing a validation survey, if the AP is changing channels or if it's changing its power levels? But say you survey an area and the access points on channel 36 and using 14 dBm power level and a 20 megahertz wide channel, you survey around the area, you go off, you come back, and then now the access points change to channel 100 and it's using 80 megahertz wide. That now has a significantly different look and feel to what you've just surveyed. So the goalpost will always be changing if you do not freeze these algorithms before you start doing your validation survey. So this is one of the key things to think of, and try and remember to ask your customer, please, can you freeze the RRM or the ARM, because it's going to skew your data results.
Chris, what about you? What are some of the things in regards to the do's, what you do need to do during validation and data collection?
Yes, so definitely freezing is a huge one, and that you're just going to throw your when you're looking at the visualizations, your co-channel interference is going to be completely wrong if you don't do that. So if it's static, you're going to be fine. But if you don't, you're going to throw off your co-channel interference visualization. Another thing I really like to do is that your survey is a partnership with your customer. That you really want to be talking to your site contact, understanding what areas they use, what areas they don't use in the space. If it's a co-tenant space, is that you may not be able to see those boundaries and where this is our property versus this is their property. So looking through your maps with them, understanding where you need to cover, and if I've always found it very helpful. If you can get an escort from your customer, they can do things like unlock doors ahead of you and start having the conversations and talking to the people in the offices. So you're not having a 5-minute conversation at every office. It's good to stop in and say hi as you're passing through and tell them what you're doing. But you don't want to be spending 5 minutes in every office, sort of eating up your time on site. So that escort can really be a great ally to you and let you get more data across the whole infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. So those of you who listen to our webinars know we like to do poll questions here. So we are going to ask a poll question of everybody. And so our question: when validating or gathering data, which device do you prefer to use with your sidekick? And Stu, cue the Jeopardy music as that comes in. Oh my goodness, he really has it.
Tawny, I can't vote.
Yes, I know panelists can't vote. I'm so sorry. We'll talk about what your vote would be after the fact.
All right.
All right, we'll wrap that up here in just 1 second. And let's look at, so folks really like to use the tablet, that tablet iPad, or they don't have a sidekick. So that's something, everyone does need a sidekick. You know, Matt, Chris, I know you both use yours extensively. I think that's something that is really critical in environments so that you can look at it how for accuracy and when you're utilizing those apps. But Chris, what would you have said?
I absolutely would have said tablet. That I've got an iPad Pro, and the difference in the amount of time that I can survey with the iPad Pro plus the Sidekick versus my old setup with a tray around my front with a laptop sitting on top of it, or even before that when I was young and dumber than I am right now. When I used to just hold my laptop in my left hand and walk around and survey. The amount of time that I can survey nonstop is way more. And then on top of that, the battery life difference is huge. I don't have to charge at lunch anymore. I can run an entire 10, 12-hour day with the Sidekick and the iPad and have no problems and no well, in an electric car, it's range anxiety, but for the survey, battery anxiety.
I guess you no longer have to be a wall hugger, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to be
Yeah,
that wall hugger. Every plugging in, I need to get plugged in right away all the time, right?
Every 2 minutes, plug it in.
Matt,
Yep,
what about you?
yeah.
What's your go-to device?
Yeah, same for me. I use it's when Ekahau Connect first came out, I didn't even have an iPad, but as soon as it was launched and the feature that you could use the Sidekick with iPad, I literally bought the iPad within 10 minutes of the Ekahau webinar announcement. Straight away I was on there buying it, and I can't tell you, the return on investment for me is phenomenal. I love doing surveys with iPad. I mean, like Chris, I've been doing surveys for years and years and years, going back to when I used to survey, like carrying like a big heavy laptop with all these dongles sticking out. The thing that was starting to, not only was my back really starting to hurt, or like, you know, when you're wearing them connected desk harnesses, is the things that was really starting to grind on me a bit is them wise guy comments that you would get every time you walk into a new area of the office where, are you collecting Pokemon? Are you ghost busting? Like, you selling ice cream? And you think, how do these people still think they're original? Like, every single time you walk to a different part of the office, you get them comments. But the discreetness now from having just the iPad and the Sidekick, you just any normal person just walking around. So for me, my battery of my legs die way before the battery of my iPad or my Sidekick. 100%.
I find that Ghostbusters was the most common, especially when you have when you've got the
dongles.
The dongles hanging off of. But then it was funny when we moved to the iPad and using Analyzer and then bringing up the spectrum analysis piece, that really just changed everything. Like, wow, what is that? You know, like the old school folks were like, is that a tricorder? Like, you know, what are you doing there? I was like that's cool. That's really cool.
Well, let's save Analyzer for another one. We've got a lot of great content to get through, because I think we could all sit here and talk about it for the rest of our time. But I want to make sure we talked about the do's. Let's talk about the things that we want to avoid and not do, the don'ts for validation. Chris Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of mentioned before, for me, I really don't think that you can afford to not do a validation survey. I mean, when I start to think of these questions, like, what if the installation team have not installed the access point correctly? So say you've recommended for the access point to be installed horizontally, and then they've kind of dangled it from the Cat5 cable and it's not on the wall or even on the ceiling, it's just hanging there. And that worries me that, you know, if my APs have been installed correctly. And then, you know, what if the channel plan or the RRM arm isn't implemented how you're expecting to see it? You put your faith in these vendors that they're going to get this right, but then you go around and you do your validation survey and you've got so much channel contention, you've got so much primary, secondary OBSS, the channel whips that they're using are just crazy. So for me, I feel like you can't really afford not to do a validation survey. And the other thing very close to my heart is, what if the AP installation team install an access point in the wrong position? And what I mean by that is that if you have defined on a map a host name for an access point tied to a MAC address that you're expecting to be in a position, so just say AP01, you're expecting that to be on a certain place on a map, and then the installation team, they get that wrong and they read that as AP10. Now, if you're doing a RTLS deployment and this is massive, if the APs are not installed where you think they're going to be installed for your map management, because you put that access point MAC address and host name on that specific position, and then and it hasn't been installed there, that's going to skew your data, that's going to skew your accuracy for your RTLS network. But I know not all networks are designed for RTLS, so even going to your third line team for troubleshooting, if you provide them a report that says that access point is in a certain position and this access point goes down, and they do all of their troubleshooting and still they can't get it working, and they need to replace this access point. So what they do, they'll pre-configure, pre-stage this access point 01, and then they'll give that to the AP installation team. So then they go and replace what they think is AP01, but really they take AP10 down and they put up AP1. And then now you look at it the next day and like, hey, AP1's online now, but where's AP10 gone? What did you do to AP10? And then we've still got another AP down, so validating that access points are installed correctly and in their right positions is massive.
Chris, what are your thoughts? What are the things that you want to make sure you avoid and don't do during surveying?
Yes. So if you're doing to not do while you're surveying, that you absolutely don't want to be, if you're doing a continuous survey, sort of stopping all over the place and not clicking and walking at different paces. That if you're doing a continuous survey, you want to walk at a consistent pace. You want to walk in straight lines. You want to walk at right angles, and really make sure that you have the most accurate data that you can. I'm seeing Keith come in. Keith, yeah, click when you start, click when you stop, click when you change speed, click when you change direction. I got you. I'm watching Keith in the chat.
Mm-hmm. That's why autopilot sometimes is great for that, because you can get it started and then you can just go off and you can start wandering around. But one of the things I got asked when I was doing my autopilot side is someone thought I was just taking like a constant selfie as I was walking around. So that's one of the questions you might need to prepare yourself for. No, I'm not not taking a selfie or on a FaceTime. I'm just doing a Wi-Fi survey.
Wi-Fi survey selfies.
Yeah. And then sort of jumping back, that I'm going to agree with Matt that you always want to do that validation. That if you're a consultant, you have a nice point in time reference that you can look back at. So even if everything was installed 100% correctly and your validation survey shows that everything is perfect and there's no problems, you get that document and that survey to hand off to the customer and say, this is all working. The project is now done. If they call you in a year and say, this isn't working anymore, you've got something to show that it was working when you left. And then if you're coming back to troubleshoot, you've got a reference to show what it was when you left. So you can do another survey and you can merge those files and you can set them as a primary and a secondary survey, and then show the difference in signal strength and say, all right, what changed here? So looking at that difference in coverage between the first survey and the next one, it's a nice tool to have, and it's good to save those files.
Stu, you've done a lot of surveys. What are the things that you would highlight to make sure you avoid?
Avoid in doing
or not do. The don'ts.
Not do, yeah. There's one thing that you don't want to do is don't ignore the customer in this respect. In the way is that, and how I mean this is that when you're doing a validation, be kind and be polite. Is they're going to stop and ask you questions, right? That's one thing I always want to put up there is always kind of like engage, right? And if you have to stop your survey for a minute or so, no problem. That's not a problem. The thing that's really thing is that if you don't do a validation survey, what happens is that it comes down to risk, right? It's a risk factor now. It's like, okay, what does day 3 and day 4 look like after implementation, right? Because that post-implementation, you need to validate, is it right? Is it working? Is it intended to, did you take your intention and put it into reality? Because that's going to reduce your support tickets, right? It's going to reduce the support costs, right? It's going to make sure that we're not rolling a truck constantly. So we want to make sure that at least we got that, as Chris puts it, snapshot in time. We know what it looks like. Okay, good. What's changed? All right. So we want to make sure that you do that. And validation surveys, yeah, there can be a time when you may not need to do it, but there hasn't been a time where I have not done a validation, to validate what's been implemented.
Well, and I think that's what's really important, is because your predictive design it's great to have your predictive design, as we've said, but you have to make sure that it's going to perform as you're predicting it's going to in the environment. Things could be dramatically different when you get there, neighboring networks, interferences in some way. It's critical to have that. That's the whole point of it, is to validate your design.
Yeah, and sometimes I've even seen when even doing some office installations where you expect it to be drywall, but actually it goes drywall, brick, drywall. So now where you've done your predictive model and you're expecting this access point to be able to attenuate through 3 drywalls, but it hits this brick wall and it pretty much drops straight off a cliff. So now your coverage in those offices maybe not be as what you expected. So
exactly.
And I think we learned from our training. Right, is our training says, hey, it's the prediction is a predictive, it is what it is. It is our best guess based on the information that we give it. Right. So the survey, the validation walkthrough validates that prediction.
Yeah.
And you can give that predictive the best information it can have if you go on site first and measure the walls. So those areas where you've got drywall, brick, drywall, you can catch those when you measure the walls and see, wow, that's way more than I was thinking. Or areas like I had one customer that they took over a space that I didn't know it used to be a bank, and the vault remained, and the walls just got drywalled around. So these walls that you would ordinarily think were just drywall was a bank vault. So we had to put an AP right inside of it. And caught that because we went on site and did the wall measurements first.
Yeah, and what really impresses me is that how accurate Ekahau is. Like when we've got a slide come up in a bit where I show you the difference between the predictive model I did to the AP on a stick that I did, and then the actual validation. And for me, like, it's always, it comes down to garbage in, garbage out. If you can put in that accurate data and you know what you're doing with the tool, the results are just incredible. That's why for me, Ekahau is the only tools that I will ever use when it comes to Wi-Fi surveying, with using the Sidekick and the design.
Ben, we love to hear that. That's one of our favorite things. So let's talk about some specific things that really, really do help when you're doing your survey. Matt, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I put this line in here. So the Ekahau Connect, iPad, and Sidekick equals a Wi-Fi engineer's dream for so many reasons that we've kind of explained already. The ability to have such a lightweight tablet to use to capture your data with the Sidekick, for me is the biggest game changer. Is what I was crying out for. My back was screaming, oh, I need something a bit lighter, and so now having the option of using an iPad or an iPhone to be able to just plug that in my Sidekick, and every time I've used it always works so well. It's even like the pan to zoom is so nice to use, and it's just really impressive for what really just like a slab of glass can do with the Sidekick. It's just a one-stop shop. I can't even remember the last time I undocked my MacBook Pro from my desk. I just literally, most of the time, I'll just leave the house with my iPad and my Sidekick, and for me that's amazing. I don't even have to carry like heavy stuff when I travel to the site anymore. So that's been the best thing for me. But one of the biggest tips that I could give anyone that's going to start doing Wi-Fi surveying is really try and familiarize yourself with the site. So what I always will ask is that get the floor plans beforehand. I like to manipulate the floor plans to clean them up as well. But I really try and familiarize myself with floor plans. When I first started doing surveying, I used to get quite disorientated when, just walking around and you're looking up and then you look down and you see a floor plan and maybe the floor plans are not up to date, and then some of the walls or the offices are not there anymore. And you look up and you're like, damn, there's meant to be an office here, but there's not an office here anymore. So I always ask if the site contact can take me just a quick once round whilst I'm looking at the floor plan and talking to them and understanding the environment. And the other benefit for that is the people on site see you with someone that they recognize. So that means when you go back and you're doing your walkthrough, not only have they seen you already once with someone they trust, you've got a bit more of a familiarization with the site and the floor plan. So that can save you so much time if you make a mistake when you're doing your survey. So that's one of the biggest tips I've got for people.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, and as you're walking around, I always try to plan my routes ahead of time. Is plan where I'm going to walk first before I actually start surveying, and then really come up with a rule for whatever makes the most sense for that site. Is all right. When I leave a door, I'm always going to take a left. So it's very easy for you to find where you are, where that active survey is happening, and know, all right, if I'm always going to be turning left out of every room that I come into, or down every hallway, that I can see where I'm at and I can see where I'm going very quickly. So it really helped me early on try to not get lost on the maps, even large maps with lots of different wings and lots of different rooms. That's helped me a lot. The Going back to the iPad, I know a lot of folks have a Sidekick, and then they've got like a Yoga or something, a convertible touchscreen Windows 10 machine, and think that it's not going to be that big of an upgrade. But I've really found, I was using Surface Pros for a while, that Windows 10, the native touch is just not that great. The palm rejection isn't there. It's not the same sort of experience. That the pinch to zoom just isn't there as well. That the iPad is such an upgrade over even that, which is sort of one of the best laptop options that you have. It's such a big upgrade. If you've already got a Sidekick, the cost of the iPad, I mean, I know the iPad Pro is $1,000 or so, but it works on iPhones. It works on some of the smaller iPads as well. So that small cost, it's a big difference in usability and efficiency.
And by the way, folks, we did not pay them to say all of these things. Wonderful.
That is correct. I can confirm that.
So let's talk about some of the really cool use cases, because surveying, there's some amazing data that we can get back from that. And Matt and Chris are going to share here in a minute. But before we do that, let's ask another poll question. So thinking not talking about validation, but how often do you perform a site survey to gather data?
I was actually on site today in London gathering data.
See?
And actually yesterday as well. Yeah, yesterday and today back out in the wild, which for me I love. That was one of the things with the corona stuff. Sometimes I wasn't able to get to some of them planned visits for sites to do my Wi-Fi survey. So now in the UK things are starting to get back to normal a bit more. I've really enjoyed being able to get back out and start doing some proper Wi-Fi surveys.
So it's really mixed. There's a lot of mixed answers in here. So that's actually really surprising to me too. I'm always learning new things when we do the polls. Like it's one of my favorite things to do. But let's talk about some of these really cool use cases. Matt was alluding to some of the things that he did. So let's talk about, Matt, what you were doing here.
Yeah, sure. So this was one of our warehouse customers that they provided us the floor plans for. And don't get me wrong, this is a great looking floor plan, but there's a lot going on here for what we want to input into Ekahau and what we want to see. Really, we don't need to see these green lines for where the cable trays are running. We don't need to see the grids or all this text. It's just a bit busy. So one of the biggest things that I like to do before I do any Wi-Fi survey is to manipulate the floor plan and try and, what I like to say is clean it up as much as possible. So if we look at the next slide, this is the same floor plan, but I've just removed those layers, removed some of that text, make it a little bit friendlier on the eye to see. So then when I'm doing my validation survey, it's easier for me to see where I'm walking. We can see the heat maps from our access points a lot clearer. And it's a bit of time investment beforehand, but it pays off massively in the end. And especially if you're going to be using some form of map management service. So like anything in the cloud, like Mist, Meraki or Cisco DNA Center or Prime, putting the APs on the map for a customer to be able to see for their troubleshooting. They'll thank you so much for doing this rather than having that hectic floor plan with all of the other information on there.
So let's look at this. Tell us what you were doing in this one.
Sure. So this was actually a validation survey that we got asked to do of another partner's network. So what I think happened is that someone abroad did the design and the implementation for this office, and then we got asked to go in and just validate that it's going to be working okay, it's going to be meeting the requirements, and what's going to be the user experience. And this is just a standard typical multi-floored office in central London. So when we got to site, we wasn't able to see any of the configuration assessment beforehand. So all we got provided was the floor plans, and just said, hey, can you just do a validation survey? So we're like, sure, okay, no problem. So we begin the survey. One of the things that we noticed straight away is that how many 5 gigahertz radios are on 80 megahertz wide channels, which was just is a little bit crazy to me to see so many access points that use the dual 5 gigahertz feature of the access point. So flipping the 2.4 radio into the 5 gigahertz radio and making them dual 80s. And for such a standard office space, the amount of co-channel interference or co-channel contention here was just insane. I think in one place there was like 11 we could hear 11 APs on the same channel as each other. So for an office environment like this, there was absolutely no need. So I think this was just a really typical version of when a installation gets done, but everything's left on defaults. So, you know, they've got it in, they've got it working, but all of the radio configuration has just been left to do what it wants to do, and it's just gone a bit wild, to be honest. So yeah,
I think this is an example of sort of picking the right tool for the job. Is that this doing a survey here? Yes, it gets you data about the fact that those are dual 80s, but when you could pretty quickly look at the controller before you start doing a survey, or look at something like Wi-Fi Explorer and take a look, and you know that you're going to be making the recommendation. That I've never seen a scenario where I would ever recommend dual 80 megahertz, dual radios running 80 megahertz wide channels. So you know you're going to be making the recommendation to change that. So if the customer's open to it, is doing that check first before you do the survey, and trying to correct some of that low-hanging fruit early. And then you can do the survey and the validation to catch the things like the coverage gaps, or actually look at what the actual co-channel interference is going to be, not the lifted co-channel interference with dual 80s.
I just would love to look at each individual radio pattern of each one of those APs, because I'm looking at that, I'm like, 80. Wow, that must be super loud. That's got to be a lot in that screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I'm sure there's some other people as well noticing the 2.4 that there's an AP at the top that's using a 40 megahertz wide channel and 2.4. So, you know, things like that you need to look out for these rogue devices that are just like turned on default. Usually it's from like an ISP. They just chuck something in, and, you know, quite a lot of the time what I find is a lot of rogue devices, they don't even mean to have the wireless enabled. They just, you know, they're in for another reason, but it comes with a wireless feature, so it just gets turned on by default, and then by default it wants to transmit on the loudest power, or it wants to have the widest channels, and then use like the lowest data rates possible,
because bigger channels are better, right?
Oh, of course. Look at here, you can see here, right?
You can see
Exactly.
This network's performing really well.
So let's talk about some of the data rates and what you're looking at during the survey.
Yeah, sure. So again, this is the same environment, but now just looking more at the what data rates are enabled by default, and they've got the legacy data rates turned on, and there's multiple other rogue devices in this environment that are using not even just 1611, but I don't know who decided to do channel 8 of 40, but someone needs to get on a ECSE class and learn about Wi-Fi, because that is a big no-no. So yeah, so things like this, you could, like Chris said, you could just fire up the real-time frequency monitor from Ekahau, and you'd be able to see this information. But also you collect this data when you're doing either your continuous, your stop and go, your autopilot, and it's all stored in your Ekahau profile. And you can report on that and then provide that to a customer in a report nicely. And you say, you know, have you got any legacy clients that need to collect? And we'll know, then maybe we can turn off those legacy rates. And then.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that, you know, Matt, you've highlighted the B, that column there, the B there. I mean, I think that's really important, right? Because I think that's often overlooked, right? Is those B rates. And folks who are out there that are understanding what I'm talking about is, you know, those low data rates, right? Is that, you know, you got to make sure that, you know, is it really as it needed, right?
Yeah.
Why is it there? Understand the why.
Yeah, and understand what it's doing to your overall overhead is that
Yeah.
looks like there's what 6 APs on channel one with B rates, and if there's even a couple of SSIDs per, that you're eating up 20, 25, 30% of the overall spectrum just
Yeah.
just in beacon frames and that management overhead. So any chance you can, if you don't need the B clients, and even as a band-aid, is getting rid of those low rates, that while you're waiting to sort of fix the infrastructure, if they have high channel utilization, that removing those low rates can band-aid that and get it into a usable solution while you're looking at sort of re-architecting the infrastructure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. From we did this validation survey. There was no one in there. It was just an empty office, but the channel utilization was really was crazy high for considering there's no clients in there, and that's all, like you said, from having these B rates and the protection enabled for RTS, CTS, and a few SSIDs. That utilization goes up straight away. I mean, there was a lot of low-hanging fruit from this survey that we could pick from to to really help them improve the experience when the guys did come in. But if they'd come in and started to use this network before we went in, I can guarantee they would be complaining about how bad the Wi-Fi is.
And so kind of, Matt, just to talk about this. So you did the survey in the survey app, dropped it into Pro, pulled it in so you can do the analysis and look at, what this information and where that's coming from.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, you're absolutely right. What I use the iPad and Sidekick to collect. It's why I like to call it is like a data collector for me. Is I use that to gather all of that information. So doing all the long walks and collecting all of the RF information, and then I like to you sync it back to the cloud, and then you can use either your Windows laptop or your MacBook, and then you can review that data later on as well. So you can then do the deep analysis and then do all of your reporting from Pro. But there are some visualizations that you can see even inside the iPad very quickly, and you can start to notice what's going on.
So let's look at some additional information and the signal strength that was covered that you gathered in your survey.
Yeah, sure. So what I was wanting to highlight here was the primary and secondary overlapping basic service set. So what this is so where they've bonded these 80 megahertz channels together, you always have a primary channel in your bonded channels. So what I've highlighted here in the red is the 56 at 80. So that means for that 80 megahertz part of the channel, the 56 is the primary, and then directly underneath that at a difference of 3 dBm is for the same 80 megahertz wide channel, 60 is the primary. And now this is the worst. This is the coronavirus of what you can do to Wi-Fi, basically. This is the worst thing you could do. If we didn't do anything else for the customer other than tell them to fix this, they would have gone, wow, you guys are amazing. The Wi-Fi is so much better now just from changing this one thing, because of the clear channel assessment and the difference between signal detect and energy detect on the primary and secondary. The rules are different. So what basically is going to be happening is these access points, so they're going to be thinking that the medium's clear for them to transmit, and they're just going to be slamming each other like a hammer each time they try to transmit, and it's going to be causing so many retransmissions. This is, yeah, honestly, guys, if you don't take anything else other than this part from this webinar, is do not do this to any of your Wi-Fi networks. If you see this, you spot this, fix it. The best thing we could have told this customer to do is go down to 20 megahertz wide channels, and the Wi-Fi would have been 100 times better than what it is right now.
And this is one of the reasons why I've got a heavy preference for 20 megahertz, even when I could conceivably use 40 megahertz wide channels. A little more context on this is that when you have a 40 megahertz wide channel, you're not just making the channel wider. You're using a primary channel and then a secondary channel. So your management frames are all going to go in. Management and control all go into that primary, and then only data frames are going to go into that secondary channel. And the rules are different for figuring out when you can transmit. So on the primary channel, you do a clear channel assessment, and then you do an energy detect. I think it's at neg 72, which is actually a pretty usable signal. So you've got all that is there energy on the channel, and is it weaker than neg 72? So on that secondary channel, if it's weaker than neg 72, I can transmit on it. So if you've got something else on a primary channel, it's doing the clear channel assessment and the energy detect. So that that secondary channel is going to transmit right on top of the other primary channel, and just cause you have so many retries as a result of that. So it is, you cannot overstate how bad it is, particularly when both of those networks and both of those radios are busy.
Yeah, and the other thing that you got to take into consideration as well is when you double the channel width of a channel, you double in the noise that you can bring in. So each time you double the channel, you double in, you increases the SNR levels as well. So again, I'm a massive fan of just using 20s for for most deployments. It's only very special occasions I would use a 40 megahertz wide channel.
And Keith just corrected me. Energy detect is at neg 62, so it's even worse than I was saying.
Yeah.
No. That's fantastic. Guys, I know we're getting a lot of really good questions. Folks listening, we will volunteer Matt and Chris to take questions. We'll put up their contact information at the end, so feel free to hit them up on Twitter. I just want to make sure we get through some of these, some really great content. So thank you. So Matt, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, again, so this is the same validation survey that I was doing. A lot of offices I see now, they're taking on this new look for industrial exposed ceilings, which they don't, which I think, yeah, they look great. But, you know, for an access point to be installed up here with air conditioning units, all this metal and aluminium, you know, that's not going to be great for, that's not going to be great for your Wi-Fi. So so what I wanted to say, one of the biggest tips that I could give anyone listening is make sure you use the AP notes feature from Ekahau. It's one of the most powerfulest features I think that got added whenever it got added. I use it all of the time. I use it for taking pictures of the access points. I scribble on it. I use it for when I just use the note feature if I detect an interferer and I want to take a picture of it or a rogue. When I do my wall attenuation testing, I use it all the time, and it's one of the best features. And I think if you go to there was pretty much every access point was installed like this, and now this does look very cozy for the access point. I'm sure it's very nice for out there, but that's a lot of metal and interference straight away next to the access point that we wanted to mitigate. And now usually before the AP notes feature, you'd have to maybe take a picture on your iPhone and then save that somewhere else. But now with the AP tag feature in your custom report, you can just add the AP note image. And when you run your custom template report in Ekahau, you get all of the AP images in here beautifully into your nice table. And then you can just add, you know, this requires a suspended ceiling mount bracket to bring it beneath all of this metal. And again, you're going to improve the Wi-Fi so much because you've got nothing to interfere directly with the access point. So for me, it's super, super powerful, and I use it all the time, all the time.
Awesome. And I know we're getting close on time, so I want to make sure we have a chance to look at some of the results. And this was your setup.
Yeah, so going back to the warehouse deployment we did, we did a predictive model first because the warehouse was just a pile of dirt in the ground and we couldn't get on site to do any testing. So one of the requirement was that the Wi-Fi had to work great at ground level and all the way through up to 18 meters high, because they had these really very narrow high aisle trucks, so they can scan at any sort of level. So we had to use a super directional antenna at 18 meters high, and we wasn't sure what degree of tilt we wanted to use. Do we want it to have it at say 30 degrees and get potentially a better signal directly underneath the antenna but it not go as far? Do we want to make it at 20 degrees and then it goes further but doesn't have such a strong signal underneath? And the reason I put these three pictures in here is because three different aspects. You know, you got to make sure you get your AP on a stick set up right and accurate in your position, and then in the middle picture you can see that we've got Ekahau open and we're doing our testing. But the other key part for any validation or any AP on a stick survey you do is key to get a client device and test with that as well. So here we can see our test results that we got from using Ekahau for our AP on a stick survey. So the difference between 20 degrees and 30 degrees, we knew which one we wanted to use to cover further down the aisle. And we could use that to give to the installation team for when they were mounting the access points. We had to tell them, like, you know, we want this at a certain degree of tilt. So, you know, I know this is like a validation survey, but webinar, but, you know, you need to validate your predictive model design as well. And then I think in the next slide, we've got my my fellow Wi-Fi ninja who was there testing testing with me. But this was very early stages onto the coronavirus. We were all nice and fully PPE'd up, from steel toe cap boots to masks. But yeah, so what I wanted to show here is we actually was going to use a directional antenna in the mezzanine floors and point it directly down, because there was no wall to stop the coverage going from the mezzanine out into the main warehouse. And we wanted to avoid as much bleed as possible. So we had to try and get a bit clever with what we was going to do. So what the top heat map you can see is from our predictive model of having that directional antenna facing down. So that was our predicted signal strength. And then if you look down at the next signal strength, that's our AP on a stick testing. Sorry, if you just go back one more slide.
Oh, sorry.
So I meant yeah, the middle image is the AP on a stick testing. And you can see, compared to our predictive model, it's pretty much bang on. You know, it's very, very, very similar. And then the final heat map you see is from our validation service once the actual access point and antenna has been installed. So you can, this is what I was going back to earlier, why using Ekahau with the predictive model and then going on site doing your AP on a stick testing with the Sidekick and then doing the validation as well, the accuracy for me is second to none. This is super accurate. You know, you see the predictive heat map, you see the AP on a stick heat map, and then you see your actual validation. I've got complete faith and confidence and trust in Ekahau and Sidekick, because I see this all the time, not just for this type of installation, but even when doing offices, the comparison sometimes when I show customers, this is my predictive heat map, so compared to this is what the actual installed one was. And sometimes I don't tell them and I get them to pick, you know, which one is the predictive, which one is the actual validation. And sometimes they get it wrong.
Interesting. Well, I know we're at time here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and wrap up. But we are going to, we've got a few slides left and we're going to show those after, because I just want to make sure we're cognizant of people's time. So Chris, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think as much data as you can get, and as much good data as you can feed into your design, the better the end result is going to be. So if you've got the option to go on site first and collect wall data and maybe play around with an AP on a stick, feed that into the predictive, get the install done, and then do the validation, that result is going to be better than you just doing a predictive.
Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, going on site and gathering the data is a key part of your Wi-Fi survey for your predictive model, for your AP on a stick, and for your validation. And if you don't have a Sidekick and Connect an iPad, guys, trust me, get it. You do it once and you'll be so glad that you did.
And with that, you know, thank you, Matt and Chris, for coming on. This is absolutely fantastic. And I wish, you know, we're going to have a few more slides that will show.
Absolutely.
But please, we did get a lot of really great questions, and I know both Matt and Chris are willing to answer. Please reach out to them via Twitter. Their Twitter handles are there, at Matt Starling and at the CM Reed, and they'll be more than happy to answer any questions. And with that, I think that's all we have for today. So
I think it is, and the
thanks for
recording will
joining.
be available. Yes, the recording will be available at a later date.
It will be. So with that, enjoy the rest of your day.